Hi everyone, welcome to Football and Finance with Joseph.
Nash.
And we're back again to talk about a couple of topics in the world of football. But first of all, I can see Nash, we're both repping a certain brand.
Yeah, we binned off Adidas last week, so we've only got one. We've narrowed our sponsorship down to.
We've got nowhere to go. we have to push the product placement. We need to push the Nike hard.
Yeah.
We can't get any stripes, but
Yeah, checks over stripes.
To be honest, we didn't plan this, so like to know we're on brand on weekends. But how's the weekend? How's the week actually? Like weekend's over. How's the week?
A good short week with the bank holiday, but yeah, good.
Yeah, I love a bank holiday. I mean, when you do back-to-back double bank holidays, you don't know what a 5-day week is. You're like, what? Day? What's good? But like, I think it was really interesting. Obviously, even though it was a short week, there was still a lot going on in the world of football, and I thought it was quite interesting the article about Daniel Levy and the Kings of North London. Shout out, not Arsenal, but Spurs. We have to go on the last 5 years, right? If we're going to last 5 years, I think Spurs have finished above them four times out of 5. So if we're just going on history, they are the Kings of North London. But I think obviously the article in the FT and the Guardian and a lot of papers about Spurs needing to raise capital. And I think for those who may have missed the story, I think basically the crux of it is obviously in April 2019, Spurs opened their brand new amazing stadium, Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, like absolute awesome stadium of the future. I've had the pleasure of going mainly to watch NFL, but yeah. And despite that, they've kind of had to, their first team costs have gone up 21%. So they're currently looking to make a loss in the year of June 23. So the books of last year just closing of about 86 to 88 million pounds. So they're about to make a loss, even though they've made the largest ever profit before. So they've exceeded over 500 million pounds. They're still set to make about 86 to 88 million of losses. And Levy essentially was trying to raise equity and capital in order to kind of stay competitive and compete with other top sides, which is wild because I thought the whole point of their stadium renovation or their whole new stadium was to create that new additional income, NFL, Formula One, boxing. I don't
Beyonce. There's Beyonce. They want the Beehive coming after you.
And Beyonce. So the whole point about stadium was to kind of open up this new kind of chain of revenue to enable them to be more profitable. And they're still about to make about nearly just under 100 million losses. So Nash, what are your thoughts like when you kind of heard the story? Because I had mine, but I don't want to start diluting your ideas with mine skepticism and.
I guess the one thing that I've been starting to think about just generally, is that there are so many businesses that make losses but then continue to operate. And in the football game, like a lot of teams have made losses throughout the football pyramid. They like operating on a loss. Guess one of the things, I'm not an accountant, but if you want to know about cash and what's your cash flow situation, can you pay your bills? Are you getting enough money that's being generated? Because often people look at the profit and loss and be like, I think Spotify, and we're already ahead of that football, but Spotify has been around since 2000 and early 2000s-ish, middle 2000s. And it's like cumulative net losses are close to like half of, 5 billion. I think that's right. That's crazy. Cumulative net loss of 5 billion. So over that period of time, 20 years. So if we're gonna, the fact that they like a football club makes a loss when they're in like an incredibly competitive and like there's a premium to pay for talent, it's not surprising to me. The thing that is surprising, like you said, is that their whole strategy, I think, and I think that's where I break it. Their strategy was to compete with the others, but most of the others are kind of making losses, in fact. And so it's like it's not a competition to be profitable. it's almost a competition to like do what everybody else is doing,
everyone else is doing,
which, as we can see, is pretty much making losses. So the fact that they need more money is not surprising to me in that sense. But interested to hear your thoughts.
I think I kind of thought about it in a similar way to you. So like my kind of two big takeaways was, firstly, and we'll go on to it. It seems like we keep talking about some of these topics, but it shows interconnecting nature. For me, it was the top six in whatever order, whether the traditional top six, new top six, league table top six. Their business models are highly dependent on European football. And whenever I hear that statement, no one ever just confirms it's Champions League we're talking about, guys and girls. It's Champions League. Their business models are highly dependent on the Champions League, and even with the Champions League, whether you're in it or not, you can still make a loss unless you win it or you go on a deep run, which only 4 teams can make the semi-final. That's never going to be Spurs. Sorry, guys. Only 2 teams can make the final.
They made the semi-final, didn't they? Spurs made the semi-final.
Oh, who did they play to get? Was it Ajax and
Ajax?
Like they made hard work to beat a bunch of kids, and then they still won at the death, and then they got rinsed by Liverpool. But I think that was that first thing. So business models highly dependent on European football, and secondly, Spurs are a perfect example. And this is some people will come onto later in this podcast, of what happens specifically to clubs that are not owned by billionaires, sovereign wealth, or private equity. Like, if you're not owned by billionaires, sovereign wealth, and private equity, this is what happens, because invariably you don't get a billionaire, sovereign wealth, or private equity that can inject cash into the club and write it off against themselves, whether as an individual or as part of their corporation. If you're looking at Manchester United and Ineos, right? So they're having to do things a little bit differently. And I thought what was quite really poignant about all the articles is Spurs were having to do this to stay competitive and compete with the other top sides, not to exceed or beat, to just stay competitive. So just basically to keep the wheels churning, they had to raise this money. So I think that was kind of a big thing for me. And then I think what's quite worrying also for Spurs is Spurs wouldn't be the only one that are highly dependent on European football, right? Like, all these models are built on that, which kind of shows exactly why when we were there around the time, the European Super League was so highly touted, so highly regarded by several individuals and backed and requested by various clubs. So I think for Spurs, the answer now is, even if you raise the equity, right, they've still got their net debt that's about 700 million, right? 90% of the 850 million of borrowings that they've got all to date for the stadium and other things, that's currently fixed. So like, they've got large amounts of debt, and like we were talking about, debt and making losses in football are like peanut butter and jam. They just go together like that. Like, so it's not even necessarily a scary thing, but I think what it does lead you down is this spiral of what happens when Spurs miss out on Europe for 4 seasons.
I see. I may have a slightly different take, and maybe again I'm watching too many American sports. But do you think that this is actually as a result of more like the fact that the clubs in the football pyramid are not working as one? Yeah. When you think of the NBA and NFL, like all of these like franchises essentially of each team, like there's the laws that govern it enable them to move as one organization that kind of benefits everybody. But in the current model that we have, and obviously that is backed by the fact that it's not blood in, blood out, but to get in, the members have to vote for you, and there's no relegation from it. But when you've got all these owners in football and the likes of where everybody's pretty much out for themselves, they're members of the Premier League, but it's not in the same way. There isn't the joint venture that happens. Therefore, there's either a race to the bottom, race to the top, whatever you want to call it, which means that people are taking undue risk where they're constantly overpaying for players, constantly overpaying for stadiums, all these kind of things, leveraging themselves with debt. And then if they don't have a magic money tree, i.e. a rich state, a billionaire owner, billionaire hedge fund, like they end up. It's almost inevitable that they're going to be in debt because nobody's actually in it together. That's like.
Yeah, but I think you're completely right, and I think the reason why when you look at the American models of ownership, whether it's NBA, NHL, NFL, etc., is 32. They're usually about 32 franchises,
there's not many.
32 owners. They're usually their ownership structure is usually a bit more clear. You don't have sovereign wealth or nation states or PE firms owning. They're usually wealthy individuals, and I think there's almost this collectiveness around honor amongst thieves in those industries where all the owners are very aware that collectively they can all make themselves ridiculously rich by being smart about how they look at the sport, what they do, etc. And you even have that kind of solidarity with the players, like the NBA PA, the NFL PA, the Players Association, in terms of the solidarity amongst the wealthiest, whether you're a Saquon Barkley or you're the punter for the New York Jets on 60 grand. Still, there's almost a solidarity that generates, to a certain degree, positive outcomes for all. Obviously, invariably meaning those at the top will benefit more, but there's that kind of trickle up and trickle down effect. And I feel like when you look at Spurs, what's quite worrying is they've got all the debt from their stadium, they've got the debts they already held as a club, they've got the shortfall and the losses that they've made. It then starts to beg the question that are some of the practices that I know people say it's a shameless plug that Chelsea doing actually make sense. Because like one of the things that grabbed me was they've spent 600 million, or not spent, invested 600 million on their men's and women's teams over the last 4 years, like exactly 4 years, from April 2019, actually 5 years, 2019 to 2024, sorry, exactly 5 years. They've spent 600 million on their men's and women's team, right? Their first team costs are up 21%. That's not even to win the league. That's not even to challenge for the title. That's just to try and stay in the top 6. I know the women's is a bit different, but on the men's side, they've spent 600 million, of which the composition is not necessarily clear on how much of it is men versus women, and a 20%, 21% increase in playing costs to just stay the same. And it's like, how long is that continuously sustainable for? And you can see why opportunities like the European Super League or people wanting the change in the Champions League format becomes more prominent, or the cries for it become louder, because you're constantly having to pay players more, because we've discussed salaries, the TV rights, all the stuff and the mechanics, funding, all that processes inorganically, to the point that now, even with the increased revenue from your stadium, the multi-purpose use, like Beyonce, Formula One themed electric carts, attractions, the NFL games they have 2 or 3 games, such as Wembley, quite big games, right? You're still making losses. So where do you go?
And I guess my thing as well to that is to add, like, the argument against some of the kind of collective agreements that need to happen in like a franchise model, in like the Super League model, essentially, is that there's like a known outcome as that others aren't enabled, that others don't have an impact on. So, there were people who weren't in the Super League. But I feel like genuinely there's almost like a known outcome with the way it currently is. And like it's kind of like, well, I know that I'm going to have to spend all this money. I know I'm going to end up in a loss. And for a lot of the other teams, for a lot of the lower teams, it's like, I know pretty much or for most teams, I know which pretty much position I'm going to finish in the league. So I know where if I'm going to be in relegation, if I'm going to be bottom top 10. I'm saying it does fluctuate, but the whole point is that the reason why we don't want to look at these other ways of governing the sport is because we want it to drive competition, and we want the kind of Leicester stories. But when you really think about it, Tottenham have kind of been this kind of teetering on team for a long time. Sometimes they're very close, sometimes they're not so close, and so the outcome is almost the same. I don't feel as though, to me that the fact that these financial kind of conditions that they're in at the moment are a reflection of the current system, and it is going to continue to be that way. Unless, as I said, you just have a magic money tree, which is a hedge fund.
That's the thing, is if you park like football allegiances to one side, right? Like you're a Chelsea fan, you're an Arsenal fan, you're a Liverpool fan. So to a man, it's almost a sad indictment, right? Because what it's showing is this model where you're not owned by a billionaire, sovereign wealth, where you're not funded by your usual kind of organizations that you tend to see with the top clubs, that you can't be financially successful with this model. And almost football in itself is a bottomless pit where cash and money just keeps getting wasted. And then it starts to feed into, when I was at sixth form, right, I had an economics tutor, Mr. Rebniak, shout out Mr. Rebniak. I don't even know if he's still even teaching, but we did like a module on football economics, right? Like, and obviously everyone's heads and ears pricked up when they heard football in front of that. And one of the things that I still remember, and that was like 15 years ago, is like football is just a loss maker. It's a loss leader. You do it usually, whether you're a billionaire, your institution, as like kind of a hobby, something where you're just so wealthy, you're just like, whatever, like I lost money, like the Portsmouth owners, all these owners, where they're just kind of little projects. Like you made your money in
Glazers made money though, because they're taking money out of the club allegedly. The Glazers have made money. Man United obviously is one of the biggest brands in football.
But they made their money before, though. They made their money before they bought United, and now they are taking money out and putting debt. But I think the thing is more, it's more kind of a hobby. So it's like when you get a little bit more money, or you're on a high top 2%, you take up golf, right? You join the local golf club, buy top golf clubs and set. You get all the equipment, you get top lessons from someone that's on the PGA tour. And you're just throwing money at it, but it's a hobby. You're never going to be Tiger Woods or Rory McIlroy, but every year it's 25,000 just gone. And I kind of feel like football's that. And I think the thing that also kind of gets to me is like, if with Spurs' new stadium and how they've expanded their operations to non-footballing operations, so like talked about concerts, NFL, all that stuff, they're still making losses, right? Yeah. Where else can you?
I don't know where to go with the money. Like, what are you going to do? NFTs? Remember when NFTs were a thing? Like, I don't know where they're going to start making money.
What else? Because like, even if you said commercial partnerships, you get even more. That won't close the gap. And those commercial partnerships are usually spread over 3, 4, 5 years. Sometimes you might get like a 1-year deal type thing on the shirt sponsor or the training kit, but it's not going to close up 100 mil.
I guess the two things obviously Spurs have done, which is increase their wage bill and bought a stadium, right? Yeah. And they're the things built a stadium. They're the things that are going to hit the balance the hardest. And I think there's no sign that building new stadiums is going to get cheaper, and there's no sign that wages are going to shrink. Inflation rate just keeps going up and up. Again, it's bad in the kind of other models that exist. You can control wage inflation much higher, in a much more restrictive way than you then. Then I get annoyed at the fact that then it means that certain people aren't getting paid because there's only one pie, and then everybody gets a slice, and invariably some people are getting way bigger than the slice that they should in that model. But if we're currently doing it, it's not like if you went to Spurs and said, "Oh, let's get rid of Son," and that fixes all our problems. Like the wage bill is still going to be massive. You'd actually get rid of everybody and just start playing reserves, and it's not going to happen. And I think because of the sentiment that's the connection to the community, to fans, all this kind of stuff, I think that. One I mentioned Spotify at the beginning. The difference between Spotify and maybe Spurs is that that investors still believe at some point this is going to make loads of money. It's going to have a huge return. I know we're 20 years later, but they're still like, oh yeah, that makes sense. They're still waiting. They're still hanging on. They're still that kind of like, yeah, this is still going to make money. The thing with like Spurs, it's like it seems like a really well done operationally, and therefore, and it's still not making money. So where do you go from here? And I don't have the answer, Sway, but I can't see it unless that's what I'm talking about, the actual governance and structure around football and how we approach it as a collective is different. Where like everybody tries to like scratch each other's back, and everybody tries to, like, as you said, like in the NFL, like we're all going to eat from this if we all kind of build together. But
I think to answer your last question, and you'll put where do we go from here? It's obvious where we go from here. We change the Champions League format. We changed Champions League format. We had more games. So more games means more revenue, which means more revenue or cash for the owners, which means a higher propensity or likelihood of being profitable off the back of it. Like this new Champions League format, like obviously I know they've been talking about it for the last couple of months, and we're coming up to Champions League like kickoff time. So obviously the business end, shout out Bayern Munich knocking out Arsenal, but like they lost yesterday. That was bad. I mean, it kind of looked like they were actually trying to get him sacked. How'd you go 2-0 up, hit the post, and then lose 3-2? But well, to be fair, Chelsea nearly did that. So like, anything's possible, right? I think the thing is, the answer to that Spurs question and that dilemma is if you're not one of these clubs that has that business model, and I think also I don't even know how we forgot about it. What's happening with Spurs right now reflects what we were talking about last week, where we talked about the difference between institutions and foundational clubs. Like this type of stuff of like Spurs always having to go out their begging bowl and stuff. Like Real Madrid, and they like something always comes out the hat. A magic rabbit always comes out to save some of these foundational clubs when they're tittering, whether it's government money bought out by some person no one knows about, raise funds, or like Barcelona, sell off your rights. There's always some new way. But I think this Champions League format is interesting because I think the Spurs might be some element or some answer of where do they go from now in terms of as a savior, because the new format, I don't know how like familiar you are with it. Obviously, previous format used to just have 32 teams.
Yeah, 32 teams.
Yeah, 32 teams, like in 8 groups of 4, top 2 like go through, seeding, quarterfinal, semi-final, last 16 quarter semi-final, home and away legs in all of them apart from the final, etc. And then pot seeding based on your UEFA coefficient, etc. over the number of years. Now, what they've done is they've actually said, do you know what? We're going to spice up the format. The funny thing is this format looks highly like the European Super League merged with the Champions League. I'm saying it seems very much similar to what was being presented by A22, but that person that steals your homework and then kind of messes the end bit to make it look a bit different, but then tries to tell you the homework's not the same. But that new format of you've now got essentially 4 competitions. You've got 36 teams. You're split into 4 pots of 9. The top pot is obviously your league champions, plus the highest UEFA coefficient. Then you go down the competitions based on like ability and UEFA rankings, etc. And now everybody plays 2 teams from every pot, home and away. But the teams you play in that pot aren't the same. So like Steaua Bucharest might play Barcelona in pot 1, but they don't play Barcelona at the new camp, and then in Bucharest they'll play Barcelona at the new camp, and then they maybe Bayern Munich in Bucharest. So you basically play home and away across all the pots. Essentially, the competition is the same. It's the only difference is they've added in 2 more games in the group stage element.
Yeah, but how many more games does that add to the group stage, though?
But I mean, as in at a club level, if you're thinking about it just for yourself, you're turning around and you only have to play 2 more games. But what it does, though,
gives you extra home revenue.
Yeah, that's what I was going to come up to. I was going to say what it does for Daniel Levy is you get another 2 more games, one of which will be at home invariably, but you get rid of the risk of when you draw a dead group. So when you get a Tottenham, a Lyon, a Marseille and a Bordeaux Glint, where it's like, okay, cool, none of those games, you'll obviously get season tickets going, but it's not really popping off the TV, etc. Now you'll get 2 guaranteed top teams. You'll get 1 at home, 1 away. And then in pot 2, you'll get again 1 at home, 1 away. So you'll know you'll get at minimum 2 quality sides that you'll play. And that team will be obviously trash.
You're probably, in like Tottenham's cases, you'll probably get 2 more. So you'll get the 2 because with the new Champions League rules, correct me if I'm wrong, sure, basically you've got this league and then 9 to 24 play a home and away game. And so 9th will play, so 9th will play 24th, and then 10th will play 23rd, 11th will play 20th. So, and they will then, the winners of those home and away will then go into, they will play the top 8 teams.
Yeah.
So basically, Tottenham are unlikely to finish from in the 25th to 36 or whatever in that bottom quartile. They're not going to finish that bottom quartile. I mean, it's 27. My maths is terrible. 27 to 36. They're not going to finish in the bottom quartile. So they're probably going to get 2 extra games. So that's 4 games that they're now getting extra bread for, particularly the home games where obviously the revenue is going to be higher for them. The actual money, they've not said whether it's going to go up. They think it's going to go up when the new.
It will. It invariably will.
It invariably will, and the report suggests it's going to go up by like a third, which from 3 billion is gone up to 4 billion. That's a lot of money, obviously, in revenue. What I kind of got out of this though was like, to me, it's more of a win for UEFA are scared of having a cup or a competition that doesn't have the big teams. Nobody's going to pay for that. And the teams are scared that, yes, they want to play league games, but they also don't want to get knocked out the stages too early. So like, it's kind of creating these more games. I remember last week,
maximize the earnings they have before they get
knocked out. So, and creating these games, the only thing I'm not sure is, does it dilute the program? Does it, when you're watching like the bottom quartile teams does it dilute the content basically? Or is that going to be, is that inevitable in what we currently have? Because even when like the 3rd place team plays the 4th place team, usually it's like, it's a good team, like that people want to watch. Whereas
sometimes I think people switch off, because if I take the current Champions League, right, and how they split the revenue at the end and all the revenue gained from tickets and F&B and stuff, when like you already know the top 2 are on like 12 points and both the 3rd and 4th are on 3 points each or whatever it might be, the competition is basically dead, right? At that point for that group, those 2 individual clubs that are still fighting, they may earn additional revenue, obviously, for those clubs that those will be large sums of money if you're Krasnodar or something. But when it's a Man United, like it was this year, that money is irrelevant that you're fighting with Galatasaray for, etc. But I think the question that it probably brings to mind for a lot of these teams is, what happens if this format fails? Because I kind of feel this format is UEFA's like last chance, right? Or like, so it's that kind of like, sort out your own house, otherwise I'll sort it for you. And when I'll sort it for you is A22 sorting it for you. So they're almost at the point where like right now, the owners who own these football clubs and are losing money, like the Spurs making 88 million losses, even when you've taken over 500 million of revenue and still making losses, right? Are now at the point where like we're tired of losing money. Like this competition needs to work way better for us. You UEFA making a shit ton of money from this, or a lot of money from this. We now need to start earning more of that share. I think that's the big concern, because what happens if it doesn't work? And secondly, use that example of American sports earlier, like NFL, NBA. As a player, right? I know I get paid weekly. I'm Raheem Sterling. Obviously, Chelsea aren't in Champions League, so it's a bad example. But I'm on 300,000 a week, right? That contract is for the year. That contract is for the year of league games, of which there are 38. A contract of FA Cup games, if we go all the way to the final, it's X games. League Cup, X game. Champions League, X games. You've added in another 2 group games. What stops players actually as part of renegotiating? We just talk about Spurs and the 21% increase in first team costs, so that's salary, wage, and transfer. What stops these guys going, hold on, the Champions League just added another 2 games. That's the equivalent of X% more games. I want that prorated into my next salary. So if I'm going up for a renewal, going, yeah, you were going to give me 400 because of my good performance, but let's make that 440 or 450 to accommodate for those extra games, because invariably the players don't want the more games. Like, you hear them all the time, there's too much football, the football injuries, etc., the fatigue, the quality of the product. The managers don't, because you hear Klopp going, oh, this is horrible. Gareth Southgate saying the players are tired. Pep saying that it's dangerous. So it's not the players, it's not the managers. So who's winning? The owners. So,
and one of the things, my angle on it is, again, not does it just dilute the Champions League, does it dilute the other competitions because of just like how much football is going to be on the telly all the time? So things like the Carabao Cup or Carling Cup, depending on how old you are, like, does that just need to be deaded now? Like, honestly,
it sounds mad though, but I do think it's going to start to spell the end of some of these domestic competitions, whereby if they don't accept their fate, what they will have is, I don't know if you remember that time, like Arsene Wenger for Arsenal fielded like nobody was over 22. I literally, and like,
but it's happening in terms not just like the secondary cups, like Ligue 1, who we talked about a couple of weeks ago. I think they shrunk their league from 20 teams to 18 teams, with the envisaging that there was going to be more Champions League games, which obviously there is. But I don't think there is as many as there was going to be, because I think it depends on who you speak. Some people were trying to mess with the co-efficiency, so it better favored their league. Some were trying to do it so it better favored their league and guarantee basically them getting into the Champions League. But I'm sure League and basically were like, oh yeah, there's going to like 10 games, so you'd play 10 Champions League group games, which as a guarantee, which meant that they shrunk their League to 18 teams.
10, but the thing I'm just starting to like is the question now more about, actually, have we reached a point where the Champions League in its current format doesn't work for the people who own the clubs that own their competition? I think that's the exam question. How do you make the Champions League work for the owners? That's the question. It's not the fans, because I know they go, oh, we want to broaden its reach. We've now gone to 36 clubs. We're trying to get clubs from different parts of Europe involved in European competitions. We've got 3 tiers of competitions within the Champions, within the Europe. So Europa League, we've got all these competitions. But is it just more, how do you keep 10 owners happy? Like,
and by those owners, you mean the ones who aren't, who don't care about being loss making, the Daniel Levy's of
the ones who don't care. How do you keep those guys happy? And how do you keep the institutional clubs that you talked about, the AC Milans, the Bayern Munich, those kind of parts of society like Staples, etc., happy, plus the new blood, a new breed of clubs that have come into money and may have come from nowhere? How do you keep all those owners happy? And I think the question is to cut them a bigger part of the pie, but adding more games. But actually, the actual way to do it would be to have the same amount of games, not change the competition, but actually just give them a bigger share of the revenue from the revenue split, or change the coefficient formula so they had more spots, and then take out, it sounds hard to say, if we have any Moldovan listeners, I'm just using it as an example, like the Moldovan champions are not in the competition, because invariably, like, the quality of the reason the quality of the football's gone down is I remember growing up in the years of the Champions League where teams would go to Rosenborg away, right? Do you remember? And you might beat Rosenborg at your home, but going away to Norway Wednesday, like that, or that arriving on the Tuesday morning, you probably lose 2-1. Now you go to Krasnodar, you beat them 6-0. Krasnodar come to you, you beat them 9-0. Like threats and all the competitions, those away grounds don't have the fear factor. Apart from Turkey, obviously, shout out Fenerbahce and Galatasaray. Those places, regardless,
they've been institutions though in European football for a while. Like
those are hostile places.
They've had a dip, like in terms of quality at times, but even if you go back to teams in the 90s, they were still dangerous.
And I think that, like, the thing is, we used to have more Fenerbahce and Galatasaray back when you and I were growing up, like in the Champions League, where they weren't jokers. Like they would win quite a lot of their home games. They just didn't travel well. But I just feel now you're just seeing the competition and people just getting wasted.
The only thing I think about it as well is like maybe I don't know if this is a strictly financial point, but it maybe does affect you because it might affect your ability to move forward. Is that what if you get the top 2 teams in each pot? So obviously there's 9 teams in each pot, and you're kind of drawn against 2 in each pot.
Yeah.
If you then play City and the the second best
Roma.
team, pardon?
Like Roma or like Inter Milan or
yeah, even it's like City and Real Madrid. They're your 2 teams that you play.
Oh, in pot A, yeah.
And then in the second part, it's like somebody who should have been who would, if there was a 10th seed, they would be the 10th seed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you just keep getting the highest seeds in each. Then you'll be kind of annoyed in that particular format. It probably does mean that you play more games, so maybe not that bad. It means that you would, if you're in the group of death like you have now, you would only be playing 6 games, whereas in this you're going to be playing, definitely 8 games. Then you're going to struggle, so you're probably going to finish in that 9th to 27th and get a couple more games. So as a fan, you also, and as an owner, I think the owners are also thinking about their brand and like, if like routinely you're being in a league table and you're just you're nowhere near like all the state-backed and hedge fund-backed teams, it's going to kind of just reinforce some of those problems where it's like, oh, these are the money guys and they're at the top, and these are the guys who are trying to get by in a loss-making situation. And I do think even though like a lot of owners do still care about making profit, it's just that some of them are much able to kind of write it off and cover it through other things.
It's going to be a hard one to kind of see in terms of predict what happens, but I do genuinely feel, like in Game of Thrones, like winter is coming. I feel like change is coming, and I really don't think it's the change that UEFA think it is. I think it's that type of thing that, like, I do think it's actually quite interesting. If you look at it, genesis and history of the Premier League, when it was first tabled as a proposal, when they were looking at pivoting away from the original English First Division, it felt the same reticent, like the same challenges from various audiences, etc. And look at it now, 20-something years later. People said it would kill off the EFL. It hasn't really killed off the EFL. It's just created like 2 different kind of institutions and products. But I almost feel like the European Super League will come to force and return. I do think it will come in a different format, and I think the sales point of why it will land is this new Champions League format just won't work. Like the additional games just won't work. And also, right, let's say you're the top seeds, you like we said, your pot 1, you play 2 from each pot, right? If you've won all your pot 1 games, you won your pot 2 games, or you're obviously not going to play them in that order. You'll do like maybe Barcelona, then you'll go down and play Steaua Bucharest, etc. With what's going on in your league season, you might actually just say, you know what, Haaland will play against the pot 1 and pot 2, pot 3 and pot 4. I'm going to use some of the youngsters instead. I'm going to put Alvarez up front, and then I'm going to use some of the fringe players who aren't getting much minutes in those games, Jack Grealish, etc. All these other guys. Like, you're laughing, but because you'll just be like, actually, no, we only need Haaland for the Barcelona and the Bayern Munich. And
you do that now in terms of like resting players, and you know, you get to 10, 11 points and you're kind of automatically through. Maybe there's, you know,
you do, but remember, this time round, you're chasing seeding within your tiering. So like back then, you'd be like, I've got 10 points, I can't be caught, I've won the group. Now you're actually like, wait, no, we've won our first 4. If we draw our last 2, we can select from 1st to 4th seed.
Yeah,
but you're going to play the clubs with like bigger squads, like where they've got 2 first 11s.
And the club coefficient that they're doing, well, the like country coefficient that they're doing also means that you want to do well for next season, isn't it? Because you don't want, the way that they're calculating is based on your country's or your league's performance will determine how many spots you get in the next Champions League. So it could be a thing where Liverpool fans are cheering on Man United fans are cheering on Man City because they want to make the Champions League next season. And so like they want them to go as far as possible in the competition, which I'm not sure people will. I don't know if that's really cutting off your nose to spite your face, but that's the reality of it. It's like, oh, you might want Man City to win the Champions League this year, so that gives you that extra place.
I think we're in that position now because I think because there's an additional 4 teams from the 32. The UEFA's 1 and 2 will get an additional spot. So hence why it's in Spurs' interest for Arsenal, Man City, West Ham, all the clubs in European competitions to go as far as they're going now to ensure that they're able to kind of get in on that kind of current guise or example. But I think one of the things that's quite interesting off the back of obviously this change in the Champions League format is why we're having the change, right? Like, so I've kind of put forward the thing that it's like, it's about the men who want to buy football clubs and the men who own football clubs. And I think ultimately we don't focus on the owners of football clubs as much as we probably should. And I guess sometimes we don't because of their level of activity, the assumption that the people buying the product or buying the clubs are as invested as we. And also sometimes maybe people don't want to see that football at its heart is just another business. I know it's a form of entertainment, but it is just another business. There's a product, there's a transaction, there's services paid for, goods, etc. It's just a different form of business that happens to also provide a source of entertainment or respite for certain people. So I guess the thing is, like, if we look at the club owners, right, and how this, like, the FA fit and proper test, that we've talked about it at length, and obviously you know that I have my views in terms of its effectiveness across all leagues, all parts of the pyramids. I'd be first keen to kind of hear what you think about the current state of like club ownership in England. I know it's a bit harder because we don't really know what's going on in Spain or France or Germany unless it's like one of the big clubs where they explain their governance and their structure. But I'd be keen to get your thoughts.
I think a lot of teams are, a lot of clubs are still seen as commercial opportunities for potential owners. There's a lot of people who are willing to put their money in, you know, to try and it's even a trend in the lower league. So it's not just a top 6 thing or the Premier League thing. There's people who are willing to put their money in because they feel like they can, you know, extract something from this. Now, I feel like they can also extract something from this because of what we just talked about in the last section, which is like a lot of these clubs aren't performing well financially. So you're in a bit of like a come rescue me position. And you're naturally then more likely to be taken advantage of when you're desperate, isn't it? So you're more likely to deal with people who have nefarious aims to exploit and to don't really care much about the football. They're, you know, much more commercially minded, in order, and just like I think it's a status symbol. I think that's another thing we talked about with these state-backed, with these billionaires, like owning a football club or is just like, I'm that person. I'm that wealthy. I'm that influential. I'm that powerful. It's another, you know, porn, or essentially, and it's a hobby for me. In fact, so I feel like there is that side to it where a lot of it is driven by ego for some people, and then a lot of it is driven by, let's see how can I make money from this, how can I extract from this, because it feels like there's an endless pot of money that's within football. It's not always the greatest in terms of like, and because we're so used to, I guess, like the model is like set up for, even when we think of like problem sustainability rules, they're like, yeah, it's okay to make a loss of 105 million. And again, like a lot of businesses that make those kind of losses over that sustained period of 3 years, outside of things like Spotify and what I just mentioned, market forces lead them to be like, you're done. There's no coming back for somebody.
It's that point that you just made. Like the thing is, right? So like obviously you talked about one of our previous podcasts about obviously Derby and their skirmish with dodgy owners as well, right? I think it's because of that last point you made about the fact that the Premiership profit and sustainability rules allows clubs to lose 105 million over 3 years. That is what makes them susceptible to ownership from fraudsters or people that are quite nefarious, because invariably there's a level of vulnerability that these clubs have. Like you just said it, if you're losing, think about it in any business, right? If you're losing 100 million over 3 years, you're never profitable. You've got debts. Like take the Tottenham example that we were talking about, right? You've got like your net debts, you've got borrowing that's fixed, that you're refinancing, you're making losses. This is why I think, because of the fact that the clubs aren't financially sustainable or set up to be sustainable, it invariably attracts the type of individuals that see them as opportunities for their own selfish purposes, or it can actually attract good buyers that actually want to turn it round, or opportunities for individuals to, like, for example, levy further debt on the club or extract the assets that the club may own, whether it's the land that the stadium is on or the pitch. So I think that there's almost that thing of like, whenever people talk about bad owners, like, oh, that owner's just come in, he's tried to buy a club or try and ruin our club, etc. I'm like, it's never that individual actually that we should be looking at. We should be looking at the circumstance of how they were able to try and purchase your club. Because if you were like super healthy financially, you don't see anyone trying to buy Brighton, right? I think they just disclosed their profit. Was it 105 million profit plus once you exclude the Caicedo sale? So like they are very well run football club.
Chelsea propping them up.
I did think that, to be fair, like all the losses on Chelsea books. Like,
yeah. Red line on our accounts, black line on theirs.
Yeah, no one dodgy is trying to buy Brighton because like they're well run. Like it's always clubs in some level.
You say that they're well run. If Brighton want to make it to that next level, and this is where the kind of football tension with the finance tension, do they then have to be a club that takes unnecessary risks or takes risks like what we see Leicester have done, and you know, start to shell out, maybe risk going down?
They know their lane though. I take your point, but I think like,
and so you said they know your lane, and this goes back to my earlier point, is that everybody knows what it is. Everybody knows where they fit. Everybody knows where they are. So when people are talking about, I don't like Super League because there's no relegation and there's no promotion and it's all fixed, everybody's already just slotting into their, you know, they're slotting into where they think they should be, not going to operate outside of that. So,
and I think that there's where it kind of gets to me. I think ultimately, how do you make clubs? How do you run businesses in a more sustainable way? And can you save organizations that are too far gone? Obviously, there was that funny thing about, I think you told me, but then I saw it as well and I started laughing about like Man United. They've cancelled the Amexes of senior people who were just like private chauffeur-driven cars, etc. People putting on those Michelin star on the company card,
on the Amex.
Just running up that tab, and because the Glaziers were asleep at the wheel, or not asleep, but asleep in their islands in the Caribbean, like nobody was actually looking at, excuse me, why all these directors rinsing up 100 grand on the Amex. But I think therein is like one of the things that, how do you, the horse has already bolted, right?
Yeah, we already have bad owners. Well, no, I don't say
really bad owners.
We already have some owners which people would argue are not the best.
Conspicuous, yeah. We already have owners that people have suspicions are not doing things in the best interests of the clubs, right? They're already in the system. The fit and proper test that existed has failed, right? It has failed in England. Before anyone starts telling me about the French, German, Spanish, and Italian league, I don't know about your leagues in terms of how you assess ownership, but it is definitely, actually, it's probably even failed in Italy. Look at the Chinese man and Chinese owner of Inter Milan. But let's discuss Italy and their corrupt owners for another day. But the fit and proper test has failed. The current ownership of certain clubs are not, let's say, they're suboptimal, right? They're maybe not what individuals, fans, and stuff would have wanted. But I know fans are fickle. Their opinions change like the seasons. Now we're in a position where the club's already there. The issues that they say are endemic, that they currently face endemic. How do you resolve them? If we take the Manchester United and my mate, I forgot his name. Man United. Jim, my mate, I forgot his name. So like Jim Ratcliffe. If we take him as an example, right? Yes. So if we take Jim Ratcliffe as an example, right, who's actually trying to turn Man United around, the question is, can you turn United around in terms of to become financially sustainable and profitable without having to continuously inject cash? Is it too far gone? And also, even if you're able to do that, how much would you have plowed in it to make it financially sustainable, right? Without your money being pumped into it, to then see it as a return on your investment. And at that point that you've done that, how many billions will you have sunk? So, like, we talked about the stadium, Carrington, all that type of stuff. And I think my worry is that football is just one of those things that, as an owner, you will always make a loss. Where your benefit to be gained is when you sell it. So like throughout all your ownership, right? So Roman, throughout all his ownership of Chelsea, lost every year, injecting cash. Hobby, loved going to finals, sitting in boxes, owns blah blah blah. But when you sell it for 6 billion, that those losses that you made, you're not feeling that anymore. You're kind of like, I've lost about a bill and a half. Like, obviously Jim Ratcliffe isn't going to get it because he's a minority owner, but
that's the thing, Joe. I think you might want to explain to people, like, profit and loss is not the same as a valuation. Like, your value as an organization goes beyond your profit and loss. It can look at your other balance. It can look at your, other assets that you have. And so when there's, like, I guess, almost like a focus on clubs being sustainable from a pure profit and loss perspective, it can sometimes be a red herring, and that's why I talked about some organizations who are always loss making, but people are like, yeah, that company still slaps.
But I think the question is, who does it matter to, right? Because invariably you're seeing it at an investor level. At an investor level, you might make a loss 6, 7, 8 years time, but you'll know that you'll sell the product and the product will cover all your losses and leave you with a healthy profit. But in between your sale and in between your ownership and your sale, you still need to keep the organization, pardon the pun, afloat, right? So if you run it badly, you risk administration, liquidation, and therefore you don't even get to get the fruits of your labor from the valuation and sale. And secondly, to get the brand valuation and sale, it's kind of like a house, right? It's like money begets money. To get the full value of your house, you need to do the loft extension, insulation, side return, kitchen, like all that type of stuff, new boiler, double glazing, on the hope that when you then come to sell it, you get all the value that you put in it, plus the appreciation because of the area and all the stuff. But what happens in the event that you get negative equity? And if you use that analogy for football, what happens if your product actually goes down? You may end up being in a place where you either sell it and you just break even, or you sell it and you take a loss on or have to write off the losses. Like I forgot Roman actually had to write off some of Chelsea losses actually.
Yeah, it goes some. I guess that's where I'm like, do you get to that point and the market conditions are not what it once was? Like, so you did that all with your house, but then interest rates are at 10% and no one wants to buy your house anyway. Do you know? So it's kind of like with football going with the way it's going at the moment, everybody who sold thus far seems to be making money on it. Apart from those clubs that have gone into bankruptcy and liquidation. If you manage to keep it afloat, like the valuation is quite high. But will we get to a point in the future where those sort of valuations are not the same, because the people that are in it aren't necessarily in it for the 10, 15, 20 year capital appreciation. They're in it for the year on year. I'm getting, a 5% profit for the work that I put in after everything. And maybe that's what I don't know if we were to feed that into the fit and proper owners test, is actually how a business plan for this club, now that you've done the due diligence, you've got all the information, you've got very smart people around you, does the proper owners test include around how you actually plan to make this organization profitable in it, or does it only look at your current
sources of funds,
sources of stuff? Because some of these people, again, like depending on where you look at where their money came from, you're like, okay, so you may have like accumulated lots of wealth and made some good decisions in that. They may have been very high risk reward situations, which on another day could have gone badly. Or it's like you've got it and people are there's rumors about where you got it from, and the same way that you did that to that organization or acquired that wealth there might happen might get embroiled in the way that the football club being run. And I'm not sure if that is currently happening in the way that it currently does. But when go back into the NFL, if LeBron James or NBA, if somebody wants to, move the Oakland Raiders to Las Vegas, they put in a business plan and they're like, this is going to make us all money. If LeBron James wants an NBA team in Las Vegas, he puts in his business plan and says, this is how it's going to make us all money. But that's not happening.
But there's one thing that you missed out, and it's actually quite interesting because Richard Scudamore, previous CEO of the Premier League, RIP, used to kind of reference this. One of the things the NFL and the NBA owners have, right, is the current owners have to kind of sign you off.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's the thing. I think like you can't just like the owners like you're coming into like a little kind of
it's a country club.
A country club, or like you're coming into the mafia. They need to like vet you to make sure you don't have a wire and you're not a snitch or all this type of stuff. And I think that's the only way that model works. But then for that model to work, like where you're vetted, everybody has to be in it together in the interest to be made. The Brighton CEO and the CEO of Man City have to be seeing football or have the same type of business mindset long term in terms of an investment as each other, whilst they never will, because invariably they come from two different walks of life. One is
strategy, like
precisely. One is this is a side hustle, and Brighton is pillar of the community. We've come from nothing. We nearly went under. Now we're here just to do the right things, support our society, and provide people in our city with a good entertainment and product. And I think the last thing I'd like to kind of leave us all on is like, and we'll be keen to obviously get your thoughts, is like, I almost feel there's an acceptance that football's a lost cause in England in terms of making it profitable and sustainable. You get the anomalies like Brighton, which everyone hold on to, by the article about the Premier League looking at the luxury tax. So their own profit and sustainability rules. I found it super mad. They've been like, we'll find this club, we'll find that club. These are the rules. We're lining them with FFP. We want them to be strong. Then we're like, actually, if loads of teams are breaking the rule, should we just tax them for breaking the rules and scrap the points deduction? And then it's like, so what you're saying is profitability and sustainability isn't possible in football. So instead, let's make some money off it by finding them financially for the privilege of them breaking the rules that we tried to put in place.
And this, I might have called this a couple of weeks ago. We might have edited it out, but still, and people probably go on at me for talking about NBA and NFL all the time. But in the NBA, they have a luxury tax. They have that opportunity where essentially the more you creep over a certain amount of spending on wages, basically, the more you have to put in a pot, which is then redistributed to teams who did not breach the luxury tax.
Yeah.
They have different tiers. It's very complicated. Obviously, involves all of their draft picks and veteran minimums and all this kind of stuff. But it actually creates a system where you might say, "F it, I'm going for it, and I don't care. I'm going to pay the fine or pay the tax." And there's other people who are like, and they also have a floor as well. So it's not just that there's like a ceiling. It keeps competition high because you can't spend under, which means that for like the players as well, that they are hopefully being, fair. Even though I think in the NBA, you could argue like top 5% of players earn way more than the other players in the league. But again, there's a lot less players. So, and the disparity, I think, it is quite high because there's only 5 people on one team that can be playing for basketball, and there's only been about 10 or 11 people on a whole squad roster. Yeah. So the luxury tax is an interesting angle that football could go down in. I think
if it does, it's done. Like if it does, it's done. Like the way football is done. Like the gap between, if they start doing luxury taxes, the gap between, and it's almost like freaking poetic how we've kind of done this. We started off with Tottenham and a different business model. We're ending here. If that does happen, it's done, because what it will do is the gap between billionaires, sovereign wealth, and state-owned clubs and private equity and all the other business models will just widen, because they have pockets that, like,
just so deep.
Yeah, like here's an anecdotal story. I used to work at an organization at some point in time, not naming any names, and one of the people that was a leader or in senior leadership within the organization who's retired, got told, or retired this year, was retiring this year, got told that they had more money than God, like by their financial advisor, which is obviously a nice statement for anyone to hear, right? I look forward to my financial advisor when I find that individual, happy to take any offers for financial advice from any qualified individuals, decides to tell me that in X number of years you got more money than God. But that showed me that, I know it's a silly anecdote, an analogy, but like for those first 3 groups of business models, if you give them a luxury tax, they'll pay it, because the interest on some of their investments in terms of appreciation more than covers this tax tenfold. Like, but if you're a Crystal Palace, you can't afford the luxury tax. So you're just going to split the league even more, which then leads ourselves into have these clubs, let's now start being honest, are these clubs now just too big to be in these leagues?
I literally said that. Like, like the UEFA can't have a Champions League that doesn't have Real Madrid and Barcelona in it for the next 3 years. They're done. So I completely agree with your point, and reinforces my point, which is that everybody knows where they are now in this pecking order, broadly speaking, and they like the disruptors to that only happen with those angel investors that you talked about, because their pockets are so deep. And even then, the way that it's got to, even now, because of I guess some of the restraints that are in with the Newcastle model, is that they can't spend the money that Chelsea did back in the day or Man City did back in the day in order to like build your stature like over a sustained period. Don't care how much money you lose, and it just keep going and going and going until you're serial winner, in a space where you're considered the top 6 or whatever. So for me, what I think is going to happen is that something like the luxury tax will come in. People will pay it, and the level of competition that people were so worried about, and the fact that there'll be no relegation, it will become entrenched. It will become further reinforced and repeated. But that's my thinking behind it. But the value to that is that, I guess, in some aspects, what you might see is like a higher level competition within those teams who are already established.
We'll have to wait and see. But all I know is that if the European Super League does come, it'll make for exciting. Can you imagine those week trips? Like you go like London one week, then Milan, London another week, then you're in Madrid, London another week, then you're in Paris. Those like EasyJet and Ryanair flights will be popping off. It will be no longer like, it will no longer be city weekenders. It'll be city weekday breaks. Like, I'm sorry, like as much as I've loved going to like Oslo on a Tuesday, but getting to go to Barcelona, etc., and spicing up with some of like Europe's large city break spots, I wouldn't really complain at. But we'll wait and see what happens. And A22, if you're looking for people in corporate strategy, safeguarding, and regulation, we're about.
Yeah. We need to be sponsors.
Shout out Nike. Free t-shirts. Anyway, that's it from us. We'll be back next week. For myself and Nash.
Yeah.
Peace.
Take care.